thank you everybody for coming out today. I really appreciate it. And personally, I love being back here. I had family that lived here for many years, and we used to come back in the summer and we'd pass through every once in a while. But it's been a little while since I've been up in these parts. So if anybody remembers any Neubauers or Delines or anything, then that's who I'm connected to. So my name is Greg Woods. I'm the program coordinator for the Alzheimer's disease and related dementias program at Iowa HHS. If you're not familiar with Iowa HHS, we used to be the Iowa Department of Public Health. Then we merged with DHS, and now we are Iowa HHS, but still do much of the same work. If you're not familiar with our program, I don't blame you. We haven't been around that long. We've been around for about 5 years is all. And I'll explain a little of where we came from and hopefully where we're going over the course of this program. But I've been in this role for 5 years now, since the program's inception. And for another 5 years before that, I was with the Alzheimer's Association, which is a nationwide nonprofit. I was based out of Fort Dodge, and I covered pretty much all of north central Iowa. Didn't come down quite this far, but I had pretty much from there up to the Minnesota border and then spread out a little ways. And when I was doing that role, I did everything from educational programs, support groups, workshops, care consultations, really whatever was needed. And it gave me a perspective on the usefulness of something like a library in a small town, which is why I love coming to places like this, because the libraries nowadays have had to become more multifaceted, and this is a great place for talking about a subject like this. So I want to thank you for having me. So this program in particular, I was asked to present about caregiving and dementia. So there's two main programs that I give when I travel around the state and I go to towns to talk about. One of them is kind of an overview of the disease, and this one is about more caregiver how-tos and tips. We'll still talk a little bit about what the disease is and some overview as we get into it, but we'll at least start there. All right, so we exist because of a bit of nationwide legislation called the Bold Infrastructure Act. And you don't need to go into great detail about it, but basically what it is it's a grant that comes from bipartisan legislation a few years back that gives money to states to build up their dementia infrastructure. I'll talk about how we're doing that a little bit later, but in part, we need your experiences. We want to hear from you. What's working, what isn't, what have you been through? That helps us because every part of the state is different and everywhere I go is different. So please, by the end of this, I'd love to hear a little bit about what you have experienced. Now, if you get nothing else from this program, one of the main things that I'd like us to do, and yeah, laser pointer doesn't work on the TV, so I'm going old school. Got one of these. If you take nothing else from this program, I would like you to leave here and be able to talk about the fact that you came today. May not seem like much, but in this topic, there's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of quietness. People don't really like to talk about this unless they absolutely have to. And what that does is that creates this permeating culture of, I don't really want to talk about that. So if by the end of this you feel like, hey, I learned something, or this is useful, this is a topic that we can talk about, please let others know. That's going to help to drive down that stigma, and it's going to make everything else that we do that much more impactful because people will be listening for it and they will be more likely to receive it. Hopefully you'll feel that way. In terms of specifics, well, obviously I want to start with what is dementia? What is it? What is Alzheimer's? Is it the same? Is it different? How does it usually progress? And I put usually in parentheses there because if any of you have been around multiple people who have had this disease, you'll know that they can be very different. This disease can progress in very, very different ways with different symptoms, different speeds. There are some commonalities, and we will talk about those. But as it relates to caregiving, knowing the general step-by-step of how this disease progresses over time can be a useful tool. And that's really a lot of what this program is about, giving you some tips, tricks, tools, and how-tos for caregiving. To do that, we'll talk about some overarching themes that will exist between all of the different subtopics. Everything that you do as a caregiver or as a care partner, maybe if you're not a direct caregiver, you can filter it through those overarching themes through that lens. We'll also talk about specifics, strategies for stages. And then finally, some resources, both local, statewide, and national. All right, seems like a lot to cover. Can this reach? Yes, it can. All right, so I always like to begin with, what is dementia? Because traditionally, people haven't always been the best about using those terms in the correct way. Science has over time used them interchangeably, and that's not technically correct. So just to level set, a dementia is an umbrella term. It is a classification of diseases, specifically diseases that affect how our brain thinks. Now, usually to be a dementia, it has to affect the brain severely enough that a person's daily life is affected. So that is an important distinction, daily life, not the occasional bit of forgetfulness, not a little bit of haze here and there, but to be a dementia, it really has to impact the person every single day and in profound ways, which we'll talk about. But when you see the term cognitive function, that just means how the brain thinks. So a lot of different things are under that umbrella of dementia. Yes, people often think about memory when we discuss this subject. And that is true in a lot of cases. But not every dementia is just limited to memory. Other things that the brain controls can be affected by a disease that affects the brain. So beyond memory, it could be our thinking ability, our judgment, our social skills, our ability to do the activities of daily life. In some cases, the ability of our body to keep itself going. All of those things are controlled by the brain, and thus all of them could be affected by dementia. Crucially, many dementias are progressive, which means they get worse over time. Now, this is really important from a treatment standpoint. That's why we tell people, hey, get things checked out early. If you're not sure if it's dementia, if you're not sure what it is, the earlier, the better. If we can eliminate dementia as a possibility, awesome. If it is dementia, then we've caught it early on, and you have more options than later in the disease. So, dementia, general term. If we go under that umbrella, into that category of dementia, that is where we find Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. But it's not the only type. So what sets it apart from other types? What I've done here is I put a cross-section of two brains up here, Brain Anatomy 101. So imagine the brain is looking directly at you, and I've gone side to side, whack, right through it. So you're looking at two cross-sections. On the left, that is a normal, happy, healthy-looking brain. It is supple, so it's got these nice, really squished wrinkles that are big and plump. You've got these really delicate fan structures where all the neurons are heading in the same direction. It looks good. The spaces are where they should be. The color definition is there. That's a normal brain. But on the right, that's a brain that's affected by Alzheimer's disease. One of the first things a lot of people notice, of course, is it's smaller. There's less brain material there. Those really plump wrinkles have now opened up as it shrinks inward, almost like how cracks form in the ground. It shrinks, and those gaps open up. You lose the definition of those fan structures. You lose the definition between the gray matter and the white matter. There's a lot of physical changes that happen to that brain, and you can see it looks starkly different. Now, from our perspective, when it comes to Alzheimer's, really crucially, I want you to look at these big spaces down here that really weren't present over on this side. It's a little stylized, but the reason why those spaces are important is because that's the first area of the brain that tends to be affected in Alzheimer's disease. And that is no coincidence that, at least in part, that is where our memories are held. That is why we equate Alzheimer's disease with memory loss, specifically short-term memory loss, so the stuff that happened most recently. That area is affected first, but as you can see, it's not the only area that's affected. The whole brain is impacted in that cross-section. So as I mentioned, Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia, but it's not the only form. There's a lot of other things under that umbrella of dementia. Maybe you've heard of things like Lewy body, frontotemporal, Pick's disease, vascular dementia. There's mixed dementias, there's pseudo-dementias, there's Parkinsonian dementias. There's all kinds of things under that category. But Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. It is one of those progressive diseases, and it starts in the memory center usually, but it doesn't just stay there. Because this is a progressive disease, the farther it goes along, more areas of the brain are going to be affected. From a prevention standpoint, one really key finding of the last 10, 15, 20 years, is that scientists now believe that some of those physical changes in the brain because of Alzheimer's can start well before any symptoms show up, sometimes to the tune of 20 years. So for 20 years, those brain changes could be happening, but a person may not be showing any symptoms. That is a scary thing to hear for some people, but at the same time, here is this big window where if we can step in with lifestyle changes or someday with medications, now we prevent it because you never have any symptoms. If you can stop it in that window before symptoms show up, you've essentially prevented a case of dementia. I'll talk a little bit later about how close we are to that. We're actually making progress compared to where we were, especially when it comes to drug treatments. We can discuss that a little bit later. There we go. So, normally, as we look at the spectrum of aging for people, the brain will go through some changes as it ages. Brain is just as much a part of our body as any other part that I think we usually picture when we picture aging. We kind of have some things that come to mind. Very few actually picture their brain in that image. But the brain is going to change. And usually what happens is it might slow down a little bit, might take an extra beat to remember something. That's all normal. That person that walks up to you and they know your name, you don't remember theirs, it's awkward. That's normal. That happens, especially if later you go, oh, yeah, that's who that was. Or, oh, gosh, I remember where they're from, but I can't, what's her name? That happens. Taking a second to go, hold on, I said, 9th, 10th, Wednesday, no, Thursday, right? Totally normal. That happens. That is a normal part of life, not just a normal part of aging. Forgetting where you set your keys. Frustrating, yes, but normal. That happens, especially if you find them later, even if they're in kind of a weird spot. When we think about the changes due to Alzheimer's disease or other dementias, those sorts of brain changes would not be in the ordinary. So for instance, you lose your keys, and when you find them, you don't know what they do. That would be a bigger concern that is worth getting checked out. It may not be dementia, but that should not be a normal lapse of memory. Driving across town, you've lived here all your life. You get lost. You're not really sure where you are, and you don't know how to get back to where you were. That would be out of the norm. For people who age, you have normal aging for a good bulk of people, and then for some, as they get older, they have some potential cognitive decline, which means, like I mentioned, their brain slows down a little bit. That's normal. That happens. Cognitive decline is a part of aging. But for others, their pathway looks a little different. They will go through normal aging, and at some point, something changes. They can tell that something is off, something is out of the normal. But maybe it's not severe enough to be a dementia where it's affecting everyday life. In that case, we would call that mild cognitive impairment, or MCI. Now, I put MCI up here for two main reasons. The first of which is if somebody is diagnosed with MCI, their risk for going on to develop dementia is higher than somebody who has never been diagnosed with it. But the second reason, and I think probably the more important one, is that many causes of MCI are reversible. Lots of things can cause our brain to be a little fuzzy or not to work very well. Everything from infection, dehydration, maybe vitamin deficiencies, maybe you haven't slept well. There's all kinds of things that can cause that. Best case scenario, you get that fixed, and that person never progresses on to dementia. Now for some, the cause of the MCI is actually the start of dementia. It can be a little confusing, but in some cases, the early start of dementia can lead to MCI symptoms. So that's another reason why it's really important to get that checked out. But the thing is, everybody goes through this disease differently. There's no two people that have the exact same pattern of symptoms at the exact same time for the exact same duration. No. If you've met one person with dementia, you've just met that one person. The brain is so complex, it likes to fight the changes, so it's going to look very different in many people. Now, because of that, it can be hard to classify where a person is in the disease. So, for the interest of this program, it's easiest to break it into early, middle, and late stage. If you try to go any more granular than that, even the little day-to-day changes can have you going, well, hold on, are they a 4, are they a 5, or no, maybe they're a 7 today. No, early, middle, and late gets at the progression of the disease, but it's a good, just overall classification. So that's how we will frame some of these topics. Now, throughout, when it comes to caregiving, just got to start off by saying it is tough. Caregiving is difficult in every facet, every day, in many, many ways. So the things that we are going to talk about today are hopefully meant to add to your arsenal as a caregiver, an extra tool that you can bring out if you need it. Not everything is going to work for everybody, and what works one day for a person living with dementia may not work the next day, but then it might work again the next day. You just never know. So having as many things to try as possible, really important. Now, throughout all of this, there are a few big themes that you can always center your caregiving on when you're having difficulty. The first of this seems really obvious, but it is worth stating because sometimes we get it, but we forget it. These are still people. I know that's obvious, yes, but what I mean is that as the disease progresses, it can be tough for us to separate the person from the disease. As a caregiver, especially when things get really frustrating, makes it even more difficult. But knowing that this is a disease that the person is being affected by can change our approach to an interaction or deciding whether we want to escalate our own emotions or respond to theirs. Behavior and personality changes are from the disease. Also, they are still a person, which means why should we hold them to any different standard than what we hold ourselves? There are days when we wake up and we're just not having it. I think we've all had that. We're just not in a great mood. We're a little more stubborn than we are the day before, or I just don't have the energy for that. I'm not going to deal with that. Nothing's going right. That happens to all of us. And yeah, we behave a little differently that day. So why should we expect a person going through dementia to be any different? That part of human nature still shows up in the disease. It might look a little different, but they're going to have bad days. They're going to have better days. They're going to have days where they just want to be stubborn. That's not necessarily the disease that is causing that, but the disease kind of changes how it shows out to us. But they are still people, so they can have those bad days. Later in the disease process, this overarching theme becomes even more important because maybe, we're getting a little ahead here, but maybe they are to a point where they can't communicate as well as they used to. Remembering that they are still people can help us in our interaction when we may not be getting much back from them. But knowing that because of that, feelings can persist past the ability to communicate outwardly, that can help us to remember, oh, I need to appeal to this. I need to pay attention because they're still going to be feeling things because they're still people. And then finally, because this is a disease that is affecting them, it's not a matter of if they just try a little bit harder, they're going to get it. And in some cases, if we try a little bit harder, they're still not going to get it. Keeping that humanity and working that through all of what we're going to talk about can really change the outcome of an interaction. Now, when it comes to communication, we're going to talk about both verbal and nonverbal. But communication, no matter what the stage is, really sets the tone for any interaction that you're going to have. Now, obviously, how you speak to them, yes. But nonverbal communication is sometimes lost in this because the person is so worried about, okay, what do I say? And oh gosh, this is going to be different. I'm not used to talking to people with dementia. There's all kinds of things and reasons that a person might have for approaching that differently. But we cannot forget the nonverbal communication because them still being a person, humans pick up on that, whether we mean for them to or not. If you come in and you are rushed or you're stressed or something's going on, but you need to check in on them, you need to talk to them anyway, odds are they're still going to be able to pick up on the fact that you are stressed, that you are in a rush. The difference here is that in dementia, they might not understand why you are stressed. Well, it might seem obvious to us that, oh, traffic was crazy and I had all this stuff going on. To them, it might be perceived as, are they upset at me? Did I do something wrong? Remember, this is a disease that affects how the brain functions and thinks. So what makes sense to them may not make sense to us, and vice versa. So nonverbals can really, really help. And we'll talk about specific examples of this in just a bit. But the verbals, don't forget about that either. Doing something simple like speaking clearly, succinctly, kindly, that can make a big difference. Not interrupting or not talking over them because you assume, well, I'm not going to get much out of them, so I'm just going to talk to the nurse over there. No, don't do that. We'll talk about ways you can avoid that. For whatever you try, there are some days when it's just not going to work. You can have the best laid plans, and some little thing that you did not see coming is going to derail all of that. That happens. This disease is unpredictable in a lot of different ways. So as a result, going into it with no expectations is going to set you up for less disappointment than if you say, nope, it's going to work today. Nope, I'm going to get him to do this. No, I've got my plan and I'm sticking to it. Disease doesn't care. Dementia does not care about that. When it comes to carrying that to other areas of your interaction, you can also never assume that you know how they're doing. I mean that both for memory, but also behavior. Just because they remembered something one day doesn't mean that they will the next, or the other way around. Sometimes situations can seem like they're going well, and then suddenly they take a turn. That can happen too. You never can predict it. Sometimes you can't wrestle it back onto the pathway where it was. That's okay. You just have to roll with it. Now that being said, if they do get out of hand a little bit more, remember safety has to be the main priority here. Caregiving kind of takes a back seat for a second. It's kind of like, all right, building's on fire, let's get people out first, and then let's deal with how they're doing. That's the same kind of concept here. Having a plan and resources really helps. It may not be the be-all, end-all, it may not solve your issue, but it is a step to take. And then finally, when it comes to not going as planned, and this is the hardest one, I know, you can't take it personally. Knowing that this is the disease that is causing this, that's great. But if they are upset at you for something that they think you did, whether you did it or not, that can be tough. If you can't help them in the way that you wanted to, it can be tough. If they are upset, and that's not your goal, it's easy to say, oh gosh, I caused that, and this is my fault. As a caregiver, you've got to try to push that out of your mind and know that you are doing the best you can for a complex disease that sometimes it's just going to take its own course regardless for how things were going. It is the disease. Try not to take it personally. I know that's easier said than done. But for a random person who came in from Des Moines today, you have my permission not to take it personally. Try to push that out, please. And we'll touch on that a little bit later too. So, looking at the stages of the disease, this can also help us to plan a bit and also understand why we see what we see. In the early stage of the disease, things can look somewhat normal. That person is still able to do most of what they've always been able to do, but you do notice a few changes. Maybe there are some more prominent memory issues. Maybe there are some behaviors that they never used to have. Maybe they're losing words or trains of thought. Maybe they're bumping into things a bit more often or falling more than they used to. There's all scientific reasons for why this happens in the early stage, specific parts of the brain that are affected, specific perceptions. But overall, this person is still able to live a fairly normal life. They're still able to converse. You're still able to have good conversations with them and have fun with them. Many of them do live independently or with just a little bit of help. This disease has not yet affected a good majority of their function. And really crucially, from a down-the-road standpoint, in the early stage, they are still capable of making decisions. This can also be a tool for a caregiver. If you're worried about what's going to happen in the future, now is the time I can ask them. I can still have them be a part of this conversation, get their thoughts, because it's early enough that that is still intact. They can still have a voice. And that can be really important both for you and for them. My battery may have given up the ghost. No, not quite. When it comes to communication in the early stage, that's the case. I'm just going to move this. Let's try to simplify. That's also a good tip. All right. When it comes to communication, early stage, we talked about how there's a lot of memory issues that can pop up at this point. They may seem minor, but taken cumulatively, it can be a very frustrating thing for a caregiver. In this case, don't fight the forgetfulness. This is a symptom of the disease. This is not something they're doing on purpose. This is not something they're doing to annoy you. This is literally just how their brain is working at this stage. So if you want to keep an interaction going in the right direction, try not to quiz them on anything. Remember that slide that said, this is not a disease where if you just try harder, just think a little harder, you'll get it. No, not how it works. Quizzing them only sets both of you up for feeling down. So let's avoid that. If they do forget something, treat it as normal. Hey, it happens. Let's just move on. Don't shame them. Don't say, oh gosh, how could you forget that? Oh, we talk about that all the time. Or what is it? You don't remember this picture? That's not going to be helpful. As a caregiver, your job is to be providing the best care possible. And in that case, it is not pulling them back into our reality or our truth. It is going with them in theirs. When it comes to repetition, whether it is in questions or whether it's in stories, that can also be very frustrating for people. Oh my gosh, you just told me that story. I'm not going to laugh at that joke again. You've told me that a million times. Gosh, you just asked me that 5 minutes ago. Why would you ask me that again? It's frustrating. I get it. But what's been most helpful for me is remembering that repetition actually comes from a place of good. That person, in that moment, is making a decision in their brain of, oh, I've got this great story. I think they're going to love it. I'm going to tell them something, and I think they're going to learn something out of it. Oh, wait, I have this question. I just don't know the answer, but I trust them to know it. I trust them to help me or to give me the answer. None of that is nefarious. None of that is trying to push your buttons. They are asking you or telling you something because they believe there is a good in it. There's a benefit in it. So please try to keep that in the back of your mind when that happens. Now, sometimes they may get hung up on something and they're not really sure what word is. That can also be awkward, yes. Because it's in the early stage and they can still make some of those decisions, it's okay to ask them, especially early in the disease process. Hey, if you get to a point where you're kind of hung up on something, do you want me to help you or do you just want me to let you go? Some people will answer definitively one way or the other. Everybody's different. Some will say, just tell me, I don't want to keep going through that. And others will say, nope, let me, I'm going to get it. Might take a little while. They might not get it, but hey, you asked them, you respected their autonomy for that. When it comes to your communication, try to avoid complexity and help in this stage quite a bit. Don't ask a really crazy multi-part question that has all these big implications or really big abstract thoughts. Just keep things simple. Do you want this for dinner or this? Let's do this or this. Hey, I'm going to tell you a story, but I'm going to cut out all the in-between stuff that you really don't need to know, and I'm just going to tell you the main point of the story because that's what we're here for. Those sorts of things can avoid that person getting lost in the moment or having that, I'm not sure what they're asking me. I don't remember what the first option is. Let's try to keep that to a minimum, and that's going to help the interaction move along better. In the middle stage of the disease, things have progressed a bit more. What was the occasional bit of forgetfulness now becomes a bit more prevalent. Memory and recall are affected on a more fundamental basis. Communication may also be more affected, so the person's vocabulary gets a little simpler. Maybe they are inventing some words or they're kind of losing their train of thought a bit more. Some communication just may not work very well. And in the middle stage especially, this is where day-to-day life begins to get affected. This is when the conversations start to happen of, okay, can they keep living by themselves? Can they keep living in the home? Can we keep taking care of them? So this is, in its nature, a more difficult stage than what the early stage is. Some people will also go through more pronounced personality and behavior changes. And at some point, I mentioned the inability to live alone safely. In part, that is because this is where you start to see the phenomenon known as sundowning a little bit more. Now, not everybody is going to go through this. But what sundowning is it is a different way of our body going about its day. So normally, we wake up just naturally when the sun comes up, and the later in the day it gets, we start to get tired, and then we go to bed. That's part of what we call the circadian rhythm. There's a specific part of the brain that deals with that. And in Alzheimer's disease, that part may be having a little trouble. And as a result, that natural flow of energy throughout the day may become disrupted. So when you otherwise would be slowing down at the end of the day, somebody who is living with dementia may suddenly get really, really active at a very odd time. Or during a wide awake point of the day, they may be sleeping. This is dysregulation of the internal clock that our brain has. And these can be challenging behaviors, not just because of the behaviors themselves, but because of the timing of them. It's not the handiest time to be having somebody going through this if you're trying to get everybody else to sleep, if you're finishing up dinner, whatever it might be. So sundowning can create its own issues. When it comes to communication, regardless of what's happening in the middle stage, it becomes even more important here to start the interaction well. Knowing that their brain is more affected, keeping that in mind that they see the world differently than we do, we have to be more cognizant of how we begin the interaction. So, for an example, approaching them from the front may seem, well, don't we do that? Not every time. No, you may not even realize you do it. But sometimes if they're facing away from you or they're kind of quartered away from you and you walk in and you start talking to them, that can be very jarring for a person going through dementia because they don't immediately see where the voice is coming from. They may not recognize it either. Or if they are facing you and you come in and you immediately start getting their clothes out and getting them ready for dinner, what they see is somebody who they may not know. They see the back of them. Where did they come from? Why are they going through my stuff? They're going through my drawers. That can be really jarring as well. So when you walk in, looking at them directly, walking in front of them so you know they can see you, that's kind of step one, then they're not surprised. Getting on their level is something also that people seem to do naturally when it comes to like kids and pets. We kind of naturally bend down and go, oh, hey, oh, hi there, hi. But for whatever reason, in this setting with somebody going through this disease, we don't always do that. So they might be sitting in a chair, they might be in a bed, and for some reason we just kind of go up and go, hey, how's it going? Oh, we just start talking to them like this. You may not outwardly say it, but there's a dynamic there. There's a difference in getting down and looking at them eye to eye than when you are lording over them and looking down at them. When you sit down and get on their level, it equalizes things. It's a bit more comfortable. Something really simple, but it can help. Another one is introduce yourself. May seem, well, gosh, they always know me, right? How can they forget me? In this disease, you never can assume. So when you walk in and say, hey, Joni, it's your cousin Bill, boom, elephant's out of the room. Immediately. You've told them who you are, they know. Best case scenario, they knew who you were anyway, and they'll go, yeah, I recognize you. Okay, great. But if they didn't, and you don't introduce yourself, then it's that whole, the person comes up to you and they know you and you don't know them. That's the whole interaction. The whole rest of the time you're there, they're going to be going, who is this? How do they know me? Just get it out of the way. Something so simple, and sometimes saying your intentions. So if you're going to get ready for dinner, tell them, I'm going to get your clothes out so we can go to dinner, rather than just rifling through stuff. Little things like that can put them at ease. It can give them a greater understanding. Things go a lot smoother. It also becomes even more important in the middle stage for us to build on something that I mentioned in the early stage, and that is we cannot pull them back into our world. they can't try harder and they'll see our side of it or they'll understand our logic, it's not going to work. So if we want to give the best care possible, we have to go into their world. Go where they are. Trying to prove yourself correct is not going to be near as helpful as just going, you know what, if you think I'm my brother instead of me, okay, fine. I'm going to talk to you the same as I was before. I'm going to have the same interaction. We're going to go to dinner just like we were, whatever. You might remember me later, you might not, but if you're happy, I'm happy. Great, that's the main thing. Let it go. Roll with it. There's this concept in improv called yes and. And the idea behind it is you're building on a scene, and the key to a successful, well-flowing scene in improv is if somebody throws out a wacky idea, the worst thing you can do on a stage is go, no, let's go do something else. No. Anyway, I'm going to say my own thing. No. Improv doesn't work like that. To keep the flow going and to build upon it and to build that energy, you go, no matter how outrageous, you go, yes, and I'm going to put something on top of that, and we're going to go with it. That is so helpful in dementia. When you don't correct them, or when you don't always understand what they're saying, but you go, you know what, if you're rolling with it, I will too. Awesome, let's go. That is going to be so much more helpful. Yes, and go with it. And this is especially true for this last one. Sometimes they're going to want to do stuff. Sometimes they're going to want things that may not make a lot of sense to us. But you know what? If you can let them do it, if it's safe, if it's not going to hurt anybody, why not try it? That may make them feel heard. It may make them feel validated. It may give them that sense of autonomy that if they're in a care facility, maybe they don't feel that often. If they want to go look out the window, even if it's not a great view, or it's cloudy, or if the window's dirty, or whatever, go for it. Don't say, oh no, let's go this way instead, or oh, here, let's do this. Just let them do it. See what happens. You might be surprised at how well they take that. Now, in the late stage of the disease, as the name implies, it has progressed quite a bit. Sometimes they call this the end stage, but you never really know for timing on that, so just late. Late can last a long time. But normally we classify late as when most of the brain is affected by this disease. Communication may be extremely limited. In some cases, it may be absent altogether. You may not get much from them, and that's okay. The person, at this point, usually always needs constant care, assistance. This is difficult. But keeping in mind that even in this state, they are still people, that can sometimes radically change how a person thinks about interacting with somebody in the late stage. When they come back and center on this, what was a disconnected relationship can be revived a little bit. You go, okay, let me think about this in a different way. So full communication. We as humans can still pick up on stuff. And this is especially true in the late stage, that if somebody has good intentions, if their tone is right, we feel that, even if we can't explain it. Kids can feel it, adults can feel it, people living in the late stage can feel it too. So something as simple as just extending them the courtesy of talking to them with respect, maybe asking them a question, even if you know you're not going to get an answer, but just give them that bit of human nature of this is how we talk, this is how we interact. I'm going to extend that to you, just like I would if things were normal. Even if it's one-sided, they can still feel that. That's going to be better than if you just look right over them and you assume that they're not going to react and they're not going to hear you. Never assume that. Also in the late stage, we know that most of the brain can be affected by this disease in the late stage, but there are different parts of the brain that do different things, and we never know which ones are more impacted than others. So when it comes to finding something for interaction, using the five senses can sometimes unlock a piece of that brain that you otherwise wouldn't see. Now what I mean by that is if any of you have ever looked up music therapy when it comes to dementia, it is remarkable what can happen. So the part of the brain that deals with hearing and the part of the brain that deals with listening to music They're actually slightly different parts and they do slightly different things. There are plenty of videos out there of a music therapist who goes into somebody who has Alzheimer's into their room, and maybe they are kind of hunched over, they're not communicating too much, maybe they can do a little bit, but maybe not. And they'll just start playing them some music, or maybe they'll start drumming them along and then asking them, do you want to drum with me? That part of the brain, if it's not too affected, you can actually see the person start to do it. And then they build up. And then they may go into some lyrics of songs that they grew up with. And I'm not kidding, by the end of some of these videos, that person is sitting up, smiling, and singing along when they otherwise cannot have a conversation. Because that part of the brain is still there. It just doesn't normally get tapped into. So using that in your arsenal, hey, I've got these 5 senses. Maybe their hearing's not great today, but I'm going to try touch. I'm going to try something else. That might unlock and get that part of the brain to light up, and boom, you've got a connection. They can feel that, you can feel it. Especially in the late stage, having no expectations becomes even more important because you really don't know what you're going to get. It might not be much. But if you go into it knowing, hey, this is how they are. If something happens, great. You know, if I get a smile out of them, if I get a reaction, if we can talk, awesome. But don't assume that, because again, that disappointment that you might feel, they're probably going to be able to pick up on that. It could be just as simple as spending time with them. If you don't really know what to do, just sit, just be with them. That's a very human thing as well. Having somebody next to you, you know that they are there to spend time, and that's the only reason why they're there. That's powerful. Keep in mind the nonverbals while you do that, so don't be sitting there, but maybe you're on your phone, or maybe you're going, okay, I gotta get going here pretty soon. Oh, this is taking a lot longer. No, don't do that. Remember those nonverbals. Remember what you're conveying, that there can still be value in spending time in that way. At the end of this program, I'm kind of curious, after hearing all of this, what have you seen, or what strategies have worked really well for you? What things are clever that you've tried that worked or didn't work, or that you've heard other people? So kind of keep that in mind, and we'll ask you about it at the end. If you want some specifics for activities to do, we've talked about some of the overarching themes, we've talked about the stages and what you can expect there, but if you want some specifics, okay, let's throw some of these up here. The thing is, there's no one-size-fits-all. So a lot of this is just going to be trying things. What works one day may not work the next. Early stage, I didn't put a lot up here because it's early. You can still do a lot of the same things. You don't necessarily need extra activities for the early stage. But even simple things like walks or looking at old photos together. Don't quiz them on the old photos. Say, oh, hey, this is the time we did this and this. Again, get that elephant out of the room. That's going to be better. Sometimes things like conversation cards. If you're not really sure what the limits of their memory are, or you don't really want to test them, things like conversation cards can give them and you thought-provoking questions or topics that aren't related to episodic memory. And you can have whole conversations with that way, based on what they think or what they feel. These are open-ended. There's no right answer to them. That can be really helpful. And that's true in the middle stage as well. Now, for the middle stage, relying on some of those senses can be helpful. We're in a library, so reading books can be good. Maybe reading to them, changing up what books you read. So nonfiction versus fiction, different author, different writing style. For things like touch, fidget blankets can be really helpful too. This gives their hands something to do, feeling textures, clipping and unclipping things. May not seem like anything major to us, but Alzheimer's causes the brain to see the world very differently, and the filter for noise and distraction can get really jumbled. Sometimes having one thing for a person's hands to do can help to calm that down. Pet therapy, just like I mentioned music therapy, pet therapy can be really powerful as well. That's a baked-in bit of human nature that we can appeal to. For some reason, when we see an animal, maybe it's dog, cat, whatever, something inside of us just knows, oh, hey, I'm gonna pet you, I'm gonna say hi, oh, look at this, oh, tail's wagging, oh, they look happy to see me. We just understand them on a different level than any knowledge. It just comes to us. That's why things like pet therapy or music therapy can be so powerful. It taps into something that we all just get, and it might stay in there. Sometimes bringing in familiar objects for them to touch and hold and see, that can also trigger memories. It can give them something to do. It can also give them a feeling of comfort. All of those, just things you can try. For the late stage, maybe pulling out more of those, not necessarily activities to do, but things that can be done with them there. So listening to music, especially music from when they're growing up, that can spark something in them. When it comes to touch, maybe they're not able to handle something very well, but if you just put your hand on them, just hold their hand or pat them or put some lotion on them, just something small gets that human interaction going, that can be powerful as well. Same thing with hair, combing, braiding hair, something so simple, but it just kind of puts everybody in this Zen state. It's just something you do, and you can just exist while you're doing it. They can exist too. Storytelling, that is also a very human thing. Because as far as humans have ever gone, just tell a story, tell them something. Again, you're not expecting them to answer, but if you tell them, they are listening, there's a connection. But it's going to be different for everybody, so try things you never really know. Now, if you are still stuck after all this, if you're not really sure where to fit in some of this stuff, there are some clues that you can take to give you a starting point. For instance, what did they used to love? What did they used to do? Even if it's something small, you never know. That might be what their current brain latches onto. Something little. So one example is in a care facility that I was a CNA in, gosh, I don't remember when that was, 2010, 2011, somewhere in there. There was a gentleman who used to be a lawyer, and he was in the unit for Alzheimer's, and they would give him a yellow legal pad to carry around with him. And that really helped to calm him down, and it diffused some situations, because then he would sit and he'd start scribbling on that pad. What was he writing? Nobody knows. What case was he reviewing for? We don't know, but that was something so natural to him. It gave him a purpose, and it gave him something to do. It calmed him down. But if they had never tried and thought, all right, what is some part of being a lawyer that we can bring here? They may not have found that. For when I talk about letting them go do stuff, you can facilitate something safely, try it. I've heard stories of people who keep trying to wander, and after a while they say, okay, fine, where do you want to go? And if they were a farmer, if they grew up in the country, they wanted to look at the field across the street. They wanted to see, oh, how high is the corn today? Is it the right color? Is it getting dry? Is anything happening out there? Just something basic. But for them, that is what they wanted to do. And for a care facility, your instant reaction is, no, I don't know about that. But once they finally said, okay, where do you want to go? We'll follow you. It became clear. This is a part of who I was, and I still connect with it now. Even something like busy work can add purpose. Not necessarily this connection, but a purpose. So something as simple as, hey, I've got these towels, can you help me fold them? Something we've all done at some point. That busy work can also sometimes calm the brain. It can detach them from a fixation and give them something to channel, and the temperature comes down a little bit. It can also be stuff that does not make sense to us. Just like I mentioned, going into their world, same idea here. Doesn't have to make sense to us. If they want to do something wacky and off the wall, if they're doing this one little movement, they just think it's hilarious, or you make a sound and they think it's hilarious, just roll with it. Go with it. They are getting enjoyment out of it. That's the main thing. Now, sometimes there are still challenges that can exist once you get into the activities. Or maybe you are right on the cusp of trying to get them to do something and you're just not quite there. One of the ways that we can work around this is our strategy for how we approach the activities. So I mentioned simplicity in speech. There's kind of a little trick, and this actually works for a lot of different situations, from kids to adults to people living with this disease, is if you are giving them options. Well, you know in this disease you're trying to keep the options to a minimum because you don't want to overwhelm them. But if there's one that you think would probably be ideal or the best for them, if you put that outcome last in your list, statistically they choose that one more. That's just a part of human nature. If you say, do you want X, Y, or Z? More often than not, they're going to choose Z because that was the last one they heard. Something to try. This is also true for number 2 in its universality. Don't phrase necessary things as a question. What do I mean by that? If you say, hey, it's been a few days. Do you want to take a bath? What do you think the answer is going to be?
No!
Well, shoot. Now we're stuck. Now they have voiced their opinion and they're stuck in it, and they've told me no, so what do I do? In that case, was it really a question that needed to be asked? Do you want to take a shower? I think you know the answer to that. You probably know what they're going to answer. There is no reason in asking that. If you need to do it, phrase it more as, hey, it's time to take your shower. And the brain doesn't combat that as much as yes or no. Again, no is the second one. Just say, all right, time to go to dinner. We got to get you dressed. What do you want to wear? Do you want to wear this one or this one? Get it out of the way. It's not a question of do you want to, because they're always going to answer truthfully there. But sometimes you still need to do it, so you got to get around it. I mentioned earlier that sometimes people just don't feel like it. Trying to recognize that can be a bit of nuance. But when you are able to detect it, that can help you too, because, okay, this isn't just them being stubborn. This isn't just them trying to get me mad or try to get out of something. I can tell they're just having a tough day. Understanding that, that's okay. That's a bit of grace. That's a human nature as well. Sometimes you have to resort to alternative methods. I do a lot of work with Becky Orr Montgomery, and her father was Johnny Orr, her mom was Romy Orr, and her mother went through this. And she loved using the therapeutic fib. That is how she called it. We are taught you don't lie to your parents, you don't tell untruths. But as a caregiver, some of those rules get a little bit reworked. Your goal is not truth. Your goal is a good experience for them, taking care of them, whatever. So if it means you have to tell something that is more like a therapeutic fib, that's different than an outright lie. The classic one of this is she would say, well, I want to go home. She's in a care facility. I want to take me home. Why can't I go home? Becky had to think, okay, do I tell her we sold the home? Do I tell her it's not there anymore? That's not going to be very helpful. So instead, she treated it as a challenge. Okay, what can I come up with? No, Mom, we can't go home. They're fumigating it right now. Remember, they're having all kinds of those issues, and yeah, we got to wait for it to clear out. If they put off a bug bomb or something, we can't go in there. Or, oh, well, hold on, we got to do this, and we got to do this because of insurance, or the doctor said so, the doctor wrote a note, so we've got to do it. Those sorts of things don't necessarily appeal to the truth, but they appeal to authority, they appeal to reasoning within them that they might go, oh, okay, that makes sense. Boom, now you've diffused it again. It may seem hard, I know. It may seem disingenuous. But coming at it from a caregiving perspective changes what you are trying to do there. Also throughout, when it comes to activities, you got to acknowledge also that things will change. Maybe they already have, maybe they will at some point in the future, and they haven't yet. But abilities change, and what you do with them will change too. Sometimes asking how you can help can clarify some of that, but sometimes just going and embracing the uncertainty can be really powerful as well. Embrace the unknown. Acknowledge that this whole caregiving journey is difficult. Alzheimer's and dementia, they suck. I just got to go with it. Radical acceptance, they call it. Sometimes that's all you can do, but that can be therapeutic for you too. Okay, quick recap. When it comes to all caregiving, communication is very key, both what you give to them and what you hear from them. What you hear can give clues to what might lead to better outcomes, and then what you give off can change the tone as well. If you're stuck on things, fall back onto some of those basic human natures. What appeals to everybody? What is natural to everybody? Use the senses that we all have. Those tools are always there. It's just a matter of figuring out how to make them work in your circumstances. And what works one day may not work the next. It may suddenly start working again. You don't know. But you cannot assume the pathway that this disease will take. Always keep them safe. And as a caregiver, you're always trying to give the best care possible. That is in and of itself a bit of safety to them. You're not battling them constantly. You're not making them feel unheard and unsafe. You as a caregiver are going into their world and trying to make things better for them. And then finally, just like we said, you can try everything. You can do the best job ever. It still might not work. I get it, that's tough. It's hard. But that happens. And not taking that personally can help you to come back refreshed and recharged and ready to say, okay, didn't work yesterday, but I'm going to try my best today. Notice I didn't say it's going to work today. I said I'm going to try my best today. Because sometimes that's all we can do. So, before we get into that, just quick, I want to acknowledge that we've talked a lot about caregiving for the person. But before we leave, I want to say something I echoed at the beginning. Caregivers go through a lot. If you are a caregiver, you have my utmost respect because it is difficult, and I know the statistics. We work with them every day. We've got them in our handouts and stuff. And all the statistics say caregiving is hard. It impacts people in many different ways, and a lot of people have been doing it for a long time. For that reason, we try to assemble as many resources as possible in our program and in our partners as well. We've got a partnership of around 65, 70 different organizations and people across the state that helped us to make our state plan. And if there's anything that you need and you're wondering about, we can try to connect you with at least one of them should be able to have the answer to that. We're a small team at the ADRD program at Iowa HHS, but we are trying to be a big compendium of all kinds of stuff. So several things that I think are really helpful. The Alzheimer's Association actually runs a free 24/7 helpline. This is for anybody to call, not just Alzheimer's, other types of dementia as well. If it's 3 in the morning, you don't know how to respond to a behavior, if you want to come up with a plan for how you raise a conversation, they can help. They're based over in Chicago. They're made up of Midwesterners. They're all master's level clinicians and above. You talk to a real person. It's a very underutilized resource. Please try to make use of that if you need it. We've also assembled on our website some online training for professional and unpaid caregivers. So these are all additional programs that have training modules or things you can watch to learn a bit more about the how-tos or learn a bit more about caregiving. And we're adding to that all the time. I'll put up a website at the end. Also, don't forget about support that you may need as a caregiver. I know it's really, really common that caregivers put so much into their caregiving, they don't take care of themselves. I get that. That's altruism. That's just how we're built. But we cannot give the best care possible if at some point you don't take care of at least your basic needs. And caregiver support groups, they're scattered all around the state. They have them both in person, virtually, over the phone. They can sometimes be helpful, even if you just want to sit and listen, to know that you're not alone going through this. There's other people that experience this, or that have strategies that you might want to try, or that you feel like you can help them with some of the strategies that work for you. Again, I can put up the list here in just a couple of slides for what that looks like, or we have resources internally and with our partners to help start your own. Because in this case, there is no support group, that at least I know of in this town. You got to go a little ways to find the nearest one. And if we can find those pockets of the state that really need it, but don't have it, we want to try to give those resources out to make that happen. A few others that exist out there. The area agencies on aging are really good at knowing what resources are out there for a specific county. So this area, I believe, is covered by Elderbridge. So Elderbridge Area Agency on Aging covers a set number of counties, but they are really good at knowing what is out there. I mentioned the Alzheimer's Association and their helpline. They've got a couple of other things online. I'll just call out this one. Also put up the website for this. It's called the Community Resource Finder. You put in your zip code, and it shows you what is closest to you in terms of resources. We're trying to get people to use the annual Medicare wellness visit. That's a whole other subject that we can talk about. Doctors don't always do that, and they don't always do it adequately, so we're working on that in the background. And then we're also trying to build up respite care. So places you can take someone who has the disease, they can be safe for a day, and you can go off and do whatever you need to do. So before you go, I'll say knowledge on 2 fronts. First off, I'll pass around a survey. You don't have to fill it out if you don't want to. You don't have to put your name on it. It just helps us. But the other thing is, through my knowledge, wasn't planning on doing that, I have learned that libraries play this really unique role in a community. So we have been wondering, all right, what knowledge can we impart, what resources can we impart to libraries that may be otherwise limited in resources around? So we designed something that we call a memory kit. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but the idea behind a memory kit is it's full of activities that you can do with your loved one who's going through this disease. And the kits that are out there were not that great. They were very expensive, so I said, why don't we just design our own? So we designed our own. We threw some Iowa connections in here, and I will be leaving this for you at the library. This is yours to keep. And this is full of all kinds of some of the things that we talked about in this program, different activities for different senses, different stages of the disease, and also caregiver resources too, to help the caregiver. So feel free to come up afterward, check that out, look through it, see what you'd like to see, but that will be out there. A lot of people don't know what that is. So thank you very much for coming today. I'll put my contact up here. There's the Community Resource Finder, Elder Bridge Area Agency on Aging, and the free helpline all up there. So please take notes, do whatever you need to, pictures on that. But thank you for coming. Hopefully you feel like you can go out and talk about this subject to somebody and at least tell them, hey, I went to this, it wasn't bad, and I learned something. Thank you, and I will stick around for any questions afterward.
Thank you, Greg. And I have to agree with Greg. We visited with our dog since 2007, many nursing homes. And we were going to Sioux City to Bickford Memory for 6 months. And we had people that we never got a response out of. And we were out on Christmas Day and we started singing Christmas carols. And they knew every song we sang.
Yep.
And sang right with us. And so that was when we said, it's not going to just be pet, it's going to be music too.
Very powerful. Yep. That's awesome.
Yes.
Any other questions?
One of your things too, puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, and word searches. My mom is loving doing those. She did jigsaw puzzles at home, and we got a table at the nursing home. She does them, and she's happy.
And that's good for you too.
Yeah.
Because you can sit, you can bond over that, you can do it together, and it is a challenge. And anything that challenges your brain is helping to build a more resilient brain.
And when she first went to the home, I want to go home. I said, the doctor said you have a problem with your health, and they have to monitor here at the nursing home. You couldn't say dementia, you couldn't say memory. I can remember everything, but I would say, the doctor said we have to keep you here because the nurses have to be able to do this test every once in a while.
Yeah.
She couldn't remember she had a test.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes, yeah.
It was that therapeutic line. I've learned a lot of those.
And I don't know if there's a way to check if there's any questions online, just to acknowledge those of you who are watching online. Thank you. But we can check there. Anybody else here while she's looking? Otherwise, feel free to come up and check out some of the resources. I've got our state plan, and then we also worked with one of the AAAs to make a dementia resource guide. Both of those can be found on our website for those watching online. And then we also have a card that's all about the annual wellness visit and the cognitive assessment that should go with it. And then we've got risk reduction cards as well. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.